We know that exercise seems to help stave off age-related cognitive decline, but why? And how much do you need? Well, a huge study in mice has pointed to a sweet spot for exercise, a precise amount that was shown to reverse learning deficits in elderly mice. It has to do with making new nerve cells in your hippocampus, the part of your brain involved in spatial navigation and forming important memories. So, what is this sweet spot, and what does it mean for us non-mice? Perry Bartlett from the Queensland Brain Institute has been studying this for decades and was involved in the 2 studies that have recently been published. So, first things first, what's the sweet spot, at least for mice? Well, the sweet spot is something we never thought would be there, but in essence it was a period of exercise that gave us the outcome that we were seeking. So, as you said, what we've been looking at was to test the hypothesis that if we could drive the production of new nerve cells in these old mice's hippocampus, that we would be able to reverse the effects of their cognitive decline, which is quite dramatic in these very old mice. So we set out thinking that exercise would be a good way of activating the production of these new nerve cells, because we knew from studies over the last couple of decades that the cells that make new nerve cells are sitting there latent and we needed to activate them, and exercise appeared to be a good way of doing it. But unbeknown to us is that the amount of exercise that was required to activate them wasn't straightforward, and in fact Dan Blackmore, the research fellow who did most of this study in a very persevering long way, found that in fact it was only one period of exercise, and that turned out to be 5 weeks of running on a running wheel where the mice run about 2 or 3 kilometers overnight, that gave rise to the production of these new nerve cells and the dramatic improvement in these animals' ability to spatially navigate. So their interesting thing was that increased lengths of time, that is more than 5 weeks, was just as negative as under-exercising for 5 weeks, which was a very surprising finding. But it turned out to really be the key to try and understand what was going on in terms of how this was regulated, because with this spike of activity, we had a clear window of looking at what the mechanism was, and that has been a great revelation. So the sweet spot turns out to be a sweet spot of production of growth hormone. So the sweet spot is not it's not sine qua non that 35 days of exercise is exactly the right amount. The sweet spot is actually the production of this spike in growth hormone production, and we know that that's the important thing in this situation, because we block growth hormone, we can block the response, and if we give growth hormone we can promote the response. So this is something you can measure now as well. You can see if it's working by measuring that hormone. Exactly. So in fact if we take these same old mice and exercise them for 35 days, but using a wheel that is very, very easy to turn, not like the one they've been working, so their workload is less, in fact it doesn't activate growth hormone and there is no improvement in cognition, there is no activation of production of new nerve cells. And there is no activation of the precursors either. So what we found really is the sweet spot is not so much the length of exercise, but the sweet spot of the amount of exercise that leads to a change in the hormonal levels in these animals. So, how long per day should a human be running on a wheel to get to this 35 days equivalent? Well, I think that's why we started looking in the human situation and started these trials a few years back, to see if there was a sweet spot. So really what we are looking for in humans, because we are not like these mice which are all identical, they are like identical twins, so they are all timed to do exactly the same thing. Every human is going to have a different capability, perhaps even a different sweet spot, so we need to understand what the markers are that indicate the amount of exercise you were doing would correspond to improvement of cognition, presumably through the same mechanism of activating hippocampal stem cells and leading to the production of new neurons. Just in 10 seconds, can you tell us when we will know? Well, we've finished this pretty large study of 150 people between 65 and 85, and we are starting to get closer. So what I can tell you, it turns out that it looks like there are sweet spots corresponding to certain changes in the blood. What do you reckon the human sweet spot is? I think getting up from a sitting position to standing is a start, then one can move on from there. That's your preferred exercise? Seriously, there's got to be a degree of intensity about it, and you've got to just be a little bit careful extrapolating from mice to humans, but the evidence is there that reasonably intense exercise can generate